Just giving it a couple more minutes. Okay, I think we can go ahead and start. So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ana Rocha, and I'm your facilitator today. Welcome to the fourth webinar of our Global Plastic Treaty series titled Procedural Multilateral Environmental Agreements. Today, we are going to talk about multilateral environmental agreements and how the rules of procedure usually work, and then talk about that in relation to the Plastic Treaty as well. Again, we are still waiting for more people to join. If you haven't already, please introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us your name, the organization that you work with, and then where you're based as well. Just for you to know, before we start, we have French interpretation in this webinar. So if you go to the bottom of your screen, you'll find a globe over there, and you can click on that globe and choose your preferred language between French and English. So we have French interpretation for all the people that speak French. And today, also, if you have any trouble doing that, if you need any assistance, you have Carissa here, so she's going to be able to help you. This session is going to be recorded, and both the recording and the presentation is going to be shared with you later on. So you have access and to the presentation and to the recording as well. And with that, I would love to invite you to turn on your cameras so that we could take a picture all together and we could see your faces. So if you are able to, maybe you could turn on your cameras. So then you can.
I think we would just need to stop sharing screen. So if Karine, you
for a moment, yes.
Stop sharing screen for a moment.
And you can give it as a beautiful smile.
So I'll take
showing the excitement that you're feeling for this webinar, because I am so excited for this webinar. So
1, 2, 3. Whoops. One second.
One more.
Just one more. Kenza, can you help me? I think I'm unable to because I have a. Okay.
I can.
Okay, go.
I'm taking it.
Oh, okay.
Are we good, Karine?
1, 2, 3. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Here we go. So Karine, if you can share the screen again, and I think you can go a couple of slides to the front at this point. You can move to the next slide, please. Yes, here we go. So in today's webinar, we are going to learn more about the procedural matters that govern multilateral environmental agreements, which are pertinent to how negotiations proceed, how decisions will be made, and who will make those decisions. This is basically, in my opinion, one of the most important things for us to know about, because it's going to determine our ability to have a successful and an ambitious treaty. So I would like to now introduce you to our wonderful speaker. Andrés del Castillo is the Senior Attorney for the Environmental Health Program of the Center for International Environmental Law, CIEL, supporting the plastics treaty negotiations. Andrés joined CIEL in 2020 and counts with more than 11 years of experience in engaging with UN human rights monitoring institutions and multilateral environmental negotiations, as well as several years working in private sector and insurance law. He's an expert on indigenous people's rights with a strong background in climate change, the environment, and business and human rights. His past work includes a mix of legal advising and strategic engagement with organizations like the European Union, the UN Global Compact, the UN Human Rights Office, the World Bank, and the World Economic Forum. So without further delay, I'd like to invite Andres to guide us through the presentation today.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Anna, so much for the presentation. It's always good to hear from other voice the path that you're doing professionally and also academically. So I will try to talk about procedural matters in general, and then I will pass through what is going on and what happened during the Plastics Treaty former round of negotiations. So if we can pass to the next slide, please. So if we understand procedural matters in different MIAs or multilateral environmental negotiations, we understand that there are different stages of negotiations in general, and even when you have a treaty, the negotiations is still going on, and the living body is sometimes called the governing body, COP, Conference of the Party, or MOP, members of the party members. So there is always this idea of, okay, whenever you put people together, you need to have rules, or what kind of the rules of the game, what you want to apply, right? And the UN is not deception, even if sometimes the model how has been negotiating many international agreements, not only on the environmental issues, but in different aspects that are part of the scope of the UN in general. But for multilateral environmental agreements, we can find some patterns that are linked to when those rules of the game apply and who decide about those rules of the game that sometimes are called rules of procedure. And we know that when you're negotiating a mandate, you negotiate under something, right? And then here you have, during even the negotiation of a mandate to negotiate, you have some rules of the game, right? Then after, during the preparatory work, you need to have rules of the game, and sometimes during that meeting also, you work towards what will be the rule of the game of the future negotiation. So then during the negotiation itself, you have a rule, you have those rules of procedure, and even before that, you pass through from negotiation to adoption of something, right? That there are different processes, even if it looks the same. And for that also, you need also rules of the game, because the people that are there are not the negotiators that you will see during the whole process, but also high-level people that have the plenipotentiary powers to engage on behalf of the country. And this is very important because the rules include also credentials. And then for the implementation of the agreement itself, you need the rules, and you need some rules on how that plays out, right? So that is kind of the different stages where you need, where procedural matters are important, right? And what procedural matters is more than rules of procedure. That includes also the venue, you know, the number of people that are presented. That sometimes that kind of details are not in the rules of procedure, because it's some of those decisions need to be flexible, and that comes as not as a rules, but as a decisions made by the body that is taking that specific decision. Next slide, please. So something important to mention here, and I'm sorry, the table is really, the letter is really small, but I wanted to make sure that you have a comprehensive view of the different rules of procedure of former negotiations, for instance, the negotiation of the Convention on Mercury, or even the Framework Convention on Climate Change, or even the General Assembly rules of procedure, or the UNEA rules of procedure, Stockholm, Basel, and so on, you can see a pattern on first a division of when we are talking of procedural matters versus when we are talking about substantive matters, right? And for the procedural matters, you have a pattern of non-qualified majority that need to be present and voting, right? Like 50 plus 1, or the half plus 1 will give you the reason to one over the, depending what you are voting for. Then substantive matters, you need a qualified majority, and the qualified majority is something that sometimes comes to 2/3 of majority of the representatives that are present and voting in the room at the time. And this is important, and you will see after, because in the previous negotiations that comes back from Stockholm and even before Basel, you have a qualified majority of 2/3. And this is very, very relevant because precedent under international law in general is crucial, right? And you can't change precedent from one day to another. And this is very important because some countries are insisting and are trying to derail the negotiation of the Plastics Treaty to try to change the realms of the game, or something that they will consider that is not fair. However, the main question here is the Plastics Treaty negotiation the place to discuss something geopolitically that goes beyond the plastic crisis? And yes, of course, it's an opportunity to discuss rules of the game, but is that the opportunity to block and to hijack a process in order to change what they call inequalities in the majority system? From our side, and our opinion at CIEL is that the answer is no. This is not the place to discuss this kind of geopolitical games. So then we can go to another slide, please. Here, I want to focus my presentation about the rules of procedure of the Plastic Treaty negotiation. And it's important to mention kind of the background of those rules. First, at UNEA, then at something that was a preparatory meeting that took place in Dakar called the Open-Ended Working Group, OEWG. Then in the former 2 rounds of negotiations in Uruguay and in France, and also the perspective of what is going to happen. So this is where I will focus my presentation today. Next slide, please. Here, don't worry, there is a lot of information there. You're going to have access after, as Anna said, to the recordings, but also to the presentation itself that give you a detailed timeline of the negotiations of the Plastics Treaty and what has been the decisions, summarized decisions of those specific meetings. And if we go back to the resolution and the mandate to negotiate the Plastics Treaty, you can ask yourself what kind of rules of the game we had at the time. And since that was adopted under one of the UN bodies, that is the UN Environmental Assembly, the rules of procedure that apply at the time were the rules of procedure of UNEA, because even if the negotiation started in one of the subsidiary bodies of UNEA, that is the Conference of Permanent Representative, the UNEA was the place and the fora that decided to adopt that mandate by consensus, right? And one of the discussion during that mandate itself was not only on the content or on the nature of the what will be negotiated, right? A legally binding instrument or a voluntary instrument or whatever, but also one of the main question was, when we create this body that now is named as INC, or Intergovernmental Negotiating Committee, do we want this committee to be a subsidiary body of UNIA, or we want something independent, right? And one of the implications from the procedural matters is that if the mandate decided that the INC was part of UNIA, so you have already mutatis mutandi the rules of procedure of UNIA that will normally apply to the INC. This is not automatic, but is something that was expected. However, we know that the discussion that took place in Nairobi came out with the decision of having an independent body that doesn't depend of UNIA for anything, and they can take their own decisions. Because of that, then one of the main decisions was in Nairobi was to have different rounds of negotiation and have a preparatory meeting, and this is part of the mandate. In the mandate, you find that to have a preparatory meeting before the first round of negotiation, or before the first INC. So before Uruguay, in Dakar, Senegal, countries and stakeholders met during 5 days to discuss different topics, like what kind of information do we need? So they request many reports or documents from the UNEP new secretariat that now is called the INC Secretariat. And also they discuss deeply about how many members of the bureau do we need or do we want, right? The first proposal was to have 2 members per region, but then after they come by consensus to the idea of have 11, including a small island developing states that can have their own representative, apart from 2 members per region. Then something that if you were able to participate or you follow the conversation in Dakar, that talks most of the place was the rules of procedure. And this is important to mention here because that was the fora to discuss rules of procedure, not the INC itself, right? During that meeting in Dakar, UNEP prepared a mix of rules of procedure between UNIA rules of procedure and Minamata negotiations rules of procedure. You had like a blend of both of them with some strategic mistakes, right? Like the first is why we need a blend. I want not to have rules of procedure as was Minamata. That was a negotiation that was working. And pretty soon the open-ended working group decided to work with the basis of Minamata Convention, say where we don't have consensus, let's go of the proposal from the UNEP draft of the rules of procedure. We will go back to the Minamata, as at the time, not the Minamata COP rules of procedure, but the Minamata negotiation itself, the negotiation of the Convention on Mercury. And that was kind of the general agreement. You had representatives from many countries in that meeting, and they agree in mostly everything on rules of procedure, right? Making some changes and adjustments related to, for instance, the possibility to have online sessions, right? Or on observers, there was a lot of discussion about what kind of observers we needed, because UNEP insisted in highlight the role of the private sector in in that draft that they produced of the rules of procedure, right? So at the end, they decided to go back to the Minamata wording, and this is what was kept as who can participate as observers. And they give also the possibility to the secretariat to when observers want to participate, they can participate through different ways. But this is not the topic that I want to highlight today. It was more about the overall picture of rules of procedure discussion, right? And however, at the time, if I remember well, Nigeria and the United States challenge one of the rules, that is the rule 37. After I will show you the text, but now I'm giving kind of the background of that. By challenging the text, they were not able to come to an agreement whether and how the European Union, as one of the only regional organization affected by the rule 37, can vote, and not on their own behalf, but also on behalf of the 27 members. So that was something that the open-ended working group was not able to come to a decision. And the problem is that they put on brackets that rules of procedure number 37. If I'm not wrong, I don't think that the whole rule was on bracket, but only the paragraph 2. The paragraph 1 is like one member can vote once. That was kind of the main. That is not on brackets. Then at INC1, there was a lot of confusion because as we were expecting to discuss substantial matters and matters related to the plastic crisis in Uruguay, in Punta del Este, we had first attempts by some countries to reopen the discussion about rules of procedure and not adopting them in a permanent basis. At the end, they decided to provisionally apply rules of procedure, and they had some discussions on rules of procedure, rule of procedure 37, right? On how the European Union, mainly in practice, can vote on behalf of the members, right? So that was kind of the intention at the time. However, we already saw some countries like China that was trying to reopen the discussion of rules of procedure, specifically for observers' participation, saying that was something that needed to be reviewed, right? And some attempts by orchestrated by Saudi Arabia to have clarity on the rule of procedure number 37. But at the time was only the question of how the European Union can vote. However, they saw the possibility to and the opportunity to reopen the discussion of rules of procedure, not only on Rule 37, but saying, hey, the rules of procedure are not adopted. But so because they are not adopted, we can keep discussing rules of procedure, right? And this is one of the theory that is still on, and we didn't manage to get to a specific conclusion after in the second round of negotiation that took place in Paris, where we had almost 3 days of discussion, or 2 days and a half or 5 days on rules of procedure, where we had a more orchestrated block of countries. I will say it's a strong word, but kind of hijacking the plastic treaty negotiation under the excuse that rules of procedure need to be discussed and adopted before anything else, right? And that comes with some specific questions, because the question was about voting, right, on procedural matters or on substantive matter, like how is possible to have a functional bureau or executive committee of the INC, because there were some oppositions from some countries to not have not accept the consensus of the region for the nominated countries to become the vice presidents of the INC or members of the bureau, right? So at INC 2, right, we had the possibility to apply provisionally the rules of procedure. However, we had something called an interpretative statement that I will show you the text after and what it means, right? Because that will affect where we are right now and the discussion for INC 3. So when you read the scenario notes, that is the document that UNEP produced or published that is made together with the chair of the conference, that say it's like the vision of the chair for how the INC3 is going to happen, includes something that I will show you after, a list of documents. And within the list of documents, there is an announcement that UNEP is producing a legal analysis of rules of procedure. This is, I imagine, some strategy to try to anticipate what can happen at INC3. That was not the case for the second round of negotiations. So this is important to mention too, that the main document that, or the gravitational document that we are expecting to discuss during the INC3 is something called the zero draft. That is the first version of what will be a legally binding treaty on plastic pollution for the first time. That was a document that was released 1 month ago, I guess, and this week the different versions of different translation came out. They are already published and available in the website of UNEP for the INC3, and on 6 official UN languages: English, French, Spanish, Russian, Arabic, and Chinese. So I invite you to go to that website and to look in the text in the language that you feel more comfortable with, and then I will try to now show you where we are right now. Right, we're 1 month and a half almost close to the third round of negotiation, and we don't have rules of procedure adopted yet. But we have some progress. We have a bureau that is functional, that was adopted, that was established at the INC2 meeting. Then we have a zero draft that contains a wide range of it's a menu card of options that, if you want, reflect what members have been saying during the former rounds of negotiations, the INC1 and INC2. And there will be also a juncture on a synthesis report of the submissions that stakeholders and countries presented. But I imagine that the synthesis report will be only about country contributions to 2 specific aspects. The first will be the scope and principles, and the second will be on different intersessional discussions that need to take place. So with that, one of the other reflections that is important to mention, and different change from INC 1 and 2 versus or looking ahead INC 3, is the number of days of negotiation. And we passed from 5 days of negotiation to 7 days of negotiation, plus 1 day of regional meeting and 1 day of a preparatory meeting that will discuss scope and principles, and also the submissions that were presented for the INC3. Then the main question will be how much it will last the INC3-4 and INC3-5 in general. We're gonna still working on a basis of 7 days of negotiation, 5 days that was agreed in the past, or we're gonna double and try to have 2 weeks of negotiations for INC4 and INC5. And this is normal in different negotiation. At the later stage, sometimes you give more room to countries to come together and to negotiate for longer, right? And because of the delays and the hijack of the process for INC2, we were not able to manage as much as we wanted, right? And because that, we were not able to have intersessional work mandated or decided at INC2, right? Intersessional work is also crucial, not only because that will help to advance the different granular issues of the plastic treaty itself, but intersessional work is important because without intersessional work, we are heading towards a framework convention style, where we're going to have general obligations without going in details to substantive obligations that are most needed, that just general obligations that are already in different international instruments. So next slide, please. So there is something important to note of that there is a precedent that was possible to vote at with the rules of procedure partially adopted or applying provisionally, and the precedent was something that was fought back by some countries that include the BRICS, except from South Africa, and Saudi Arabia and Uganda and Guatemala and the BRICS in general, the BRIC. So here, when you look at the geopolitical balance and situation of how the vote reflected interest for one or the other members of the candidates for the bureau, you see that the Russian Federation is not as isolated as we think that they are, because they got 51 votes there. And here you can see clearly a block of countries, right, that can reflect what can be a future with a remote possibility of voting, right, instead of doing everything through consensus. So I just wanted to highlight that because it's important numerically to think what it means and what means a vote, a potential vote at on the plastic trade negotiations. Next slide, please. So during the INC2, we saw another phenomenon that is a phenomenon of fake news, if I might say, or a phenomenon of myth and legends about the rules of procedure that were shared even among member states. For instance, and even raised during the plenary meeting, for instance, that rule number 1 on definitions of rules of procedure for the plastic trade negotiation allows members, means states, members of the United Nations, and not members, but specialized agencies and regional economic integrations to vote, you know, like specialized agencies like UNESCO, you know. So they were saying, like, if we adopt the rules of procedure are there right now, not only member states can vote, but also United Nations specialized agencies will be able to vote, like UNICEF, like UNESCO, and that is not true. And when you read the text never tells you that they're referring to the specialized agencies of regional economic integration organizations, but they are referring to the members of those specialized agencies. And so it's important to mention that because many countries were doubting about if that was true or not. And that also was an excuse to not only open rules of procedure on voting, but also on the Article 1. So I wanted just to clarify that when you read it, and there is a precedent because this rule and this definition has been used in different stages, you never saw a member or a specialized agency of the United Nations voting as their own, right? But the importance here is to say, the message here is to say that there is a lot of myth and fake news going on about the rules of procedure that mostly they are not true. Next slide, please. So one of the other issues that came out of the discussion of the rules of procedure during the INC2 were consultation on some interpretation that you can't just put in brackets partially Article 37 on how the European Union can vote or how a regional organization can vote, but that will need to be to include other articles like Article 38. And Article 38 is what you have in option 1, right? Like how you need to address and to take decisions, and usually it's by consensus. But then during the INC2, they were already expressed some interest in only establish the consensus as the only way to go forwards to take decisions, that will be giving a veto powers for countries in general for any kind of decision, and that will block any process and will block any ambition on the plastic treaty. The other options will be to have the possibility to vote, except when it comes to some specific provisions that like obligations, right? Measures and approaches for the plastics treaty, right? And this will be also dangerous, but is over the counter so far. They came out not moving what is and not even putting in bracket Article 38, but deciding to have an interpretative agreement. And if we can pass to the next slide, please. Yeah, that is kind of the agreement that has some room for interpretation from both sides. The countries that wants to reopen the discussion about how will be the qualified majority to vote, even if there is the possibility to vote or just run by consensus. And at the end, they say, we can't just keep applying the rules of procedure that relates to vote in the way that we were applying now, that are in the case that we apply rules of procedure, yes, that can be applied. But if we apply rule of procedure 38 on voting or consensus, countries will need to recall that there is a lack of agreement between the parties on that Article 38, paragraph 1. Next slide, please. Then for INC3, what we understand what will happen is that they will try again to see if they can adopt the rules of procedure, right? And here they're specific in saying adoption and not discussion and adoption of rules of procedure, but more adoption. And they recall that Article 38 is under not the whole article, but there is an interpretative statement about the consensus and the way how it need to be voted, right? Next slide, please. Yes, and as I was saying, those are the documents that will be produced and has been produced by UNEP or by the chair, for instance, the zero draft. And there will be a new document coming up that is really important for this procedural matter, that is legal analysis of rules of procedure. Next slide, please. Then there's an article that when you click to the cute animal that you can see at your right, was released some on the September 8th. It's about the zero draft, but it's about also rules of procedure and how there are different scenarios on what is going to happen at INC3. And next slide, please. So this is kind of the end of the presentation, but I want to make sure that we have time to discussions and to specific questions, specifically how things will evolve or at the INC3. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Andres, for this very insightful presentation. I think we have a lot of information here and very useful information for us to be able to understand what has been happening and also some of the politics that are happening behind the scenes. I would like to open the floor for people who have questions. You can type your question in the chat if you're not able to speak up, or you can just raise your hand and speak and ask your question.
Can I go ahead?
Yes, please, Rico.
Thank you. Thanks, Andres. That was very, very useful. It's a really useful reminder for us to kind of think a little bit about, what might, be laying ahead for us. Is there no way at all that the Secretariat and the Bureau can put aside a lot of this procedural kind of time wasting? Because if that happens again, we can be doing this for a very long time. And I don't see us making any progress if the rules of procedure are used against us as a fundamental basis for proceeding with the plastics treaty negotiations. Thanks.
Thank you, Rico. And yes, there is some ways to prevent things. That doesn't mean that we know what is going to happen at INC3. There will be some blocks, of course, that will try to use and gain again some time. That is important because less time we have for discussion on substantive matters, less time we have for like that decreased ambition at the end, right? Because they have the pressure to come out with something. So one of the ways how you can prevent that is by doing preventive diplomacy itself, right? Like looking ahead. And what I understand is that something that will be crucial is rules of procedure are important topic, but we can't just give a lot of room for that to happen, because otherwise we're giving the point to those countries to what they want, right? So the question is, do we need a contact group on rules of procedure, right? There has been, or, and then we have contact group for rules of procedure, and then we have the other contact group for substantial matters, right? Having in mind that only the groups can meet only 2 maximum at the same time. In our opinion, the best way to deal with that is by having a chair proactively calling for a group of friends of the chair that hold consultations, that can hold consultations on rules of procedure, right? Before the INC starts, right? And during the INC, you can keep that group going on. That is more informal, and he doesn't need the approval from the INC to create that group. He can just do it, and you can include in the group different countries that represent different views or the different blocks there. And this will be the only way for us to avoid having something more formal on rules of procedure, right? Because here, what we are fighting also is a precedent, right? It's very important to fight the possibility to vote, because it will be the first time, as I understand, in international negotiation on environment, that we won't have the possibility to vote, right? Nothing that I guess the vote never happened before in substantial matters, right? And the other is the distinction between the rules of procedure of the INC and the rules of procedure of the diplomatic conference, because the countries are arguing that how we're going to vote for the plastics treaty, and for that you will have a specific rules of procedure that are the rules of procedure for the diplomatic conference at the moment of the adoption that are not the same of the negotiation. So this is something that what I want to insist. But if we keep that precedent, we are going to end by having also a conference of the party with not possibility to vote, and we will find ourselves in a climate COP situation where decisions need to be made by consensus, right? Or we will find ourselves also without the possibility to amend or to include items or chemicals in an annex, right? Because will be consensus based, and you will only need one country opposing to a chemical or to a group of chemicals not to be included, or to a product, and then we will have an annex that is empty. So this is the big picture what we are fighting for here, and it's important to that the ambitious countries, and including the Hague, work that proactively, and the chair try to solve that, but not also giving the prominence of a formal contact group either, right? Because we need to discuss plastic pollution and not rules of procedure. This is not the fora. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. Olivia, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andres, for that very insightful presentation. Yeah, rules of procedure. I'm just wondering, when it comes to negotiating multilateral agreements, which comes first? Is it the rules or the negotiations? Because I'm actually surprised that I don't know where we are as of now with the rules of procedure not being adopted. And secondly, you talk about Nigeria and the United States raising an objection with regards to Rule 37 because the European Union was kind of coming on board. And I'm just wondering if with the multilateral agreements, is it between member states, or we also have regional organizations and specialized agencies being members? I'm kind of not getting it. You also referred to, is it Minamata rules of procedure? If you could further elaborate on that, I will be very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Olivia. And it's a very valid point, and I will try to clarify it. What I said about the Minamata rules of procedure is the rules of procedure that were used to the negotiation of the Minamata Convention. So were rules of procedure that were used and were based and inspired on the rules of procedure for the negotiation of the Stockholm Convention too. Like we are seeing there are different. The question is whether the rules of procedure still fit into the world today, right? And this is a valid question to have. The question is not that. The question is the plastic treaty negotiation the fora to do it, right? The other is fair that the European Union can vote only with one person or two persons in the room? And this is, of course, a fair question to ask, right? Because there are many African states or many developing states that they don't have the means to go to the negotiation, but they go and they need to be present in the room to vote. But the European Union is not requested. So that is a fair question. But again, is the plastic treaty negotiation the fora to discuss this and to change the precedent? I don't think so. And this is a discussion that you can take. You can create under the United Nations something else about rules of procedure, or fairness of rules of procedure or something else. But I don't think that the plastic treaty is the negotiation is the scenario for that. Then the question of who can vote is member states, period. right? Like there was some interpretation that specialized agencies can vote. That never happened in the past. You don't have specialized agencies voting in general. And Minamata rules was an inspiration because it was the last multilateral environmental agreement that was negotiated, and the rules of procedure don't work because they ended with a convention that is legally binding, and they never used the vote during the negotiation of the Minamata Convention. So also, but they had the possibility to, right? When consensus is not agreed, if you don't have a motivation, you will keep doing like the hamster. Thank you.
Thank you, Andres. Hamsing, I saw that you had a hand on. I don't know if you still have a question. If you do, you can please speak up.
Okay, thank you very much. In fact, my question was very much related to what Rico asked, right? Well, what we noted last time at INC2 is that we lost almost a day and a half just discussing on this issue of rules of procedure. And then finally, we had to rush to cover the agenda of the meeting, right? We hope that this is not coming back again at INC3, right? To me, it's clear that some people want to boycott the conference. And as Andres put it rightly, it's not this conference that is going to decide on the rules of procedure. If there is rules of procedure, I believe it was already agreed at the OEWG, right? Before coming to INC1, it was already agreed that we will base ourselves on previous conventions, and the convention that was selected was Minamata Convention. So now we are opening up all these things just to lose time. And to me, as I said, it is clear that people want to boycott the conference because they don't want plastic the plastic conference to come on, right? Because of vested interest of certain people. Thank you.
Yes, to react a little bit of what Hamsing was saying, I totally agree on your points. Also highlighting that we don't have too much time to negotiate something, and rules of procedure is one of the excuse, but we have seen also the question of scope to be reopened again, because the scope was heavily negotiated for the mandate of the Plastics Treaty, right? And this is a discussion that will take place during the preparatory meeting, right? But you have already countries like Indonesia that today mentioned that we can't talk about substance if we don't agree on the scope of the Plastics Treaty, right? So already, even if there are countries already saying positively that the zero draft is a really good base to start negotiations, right? They also condition that to the scope and the principles. And the question of the scope and principles came during INC2 because Saudi Arabia proposed that as a placeholder, right, to discuss. And we know that we can discuss principles forever, right? And in many multilateral negotiations, you don't close sometimes the negotiations because of the question of principles. And that was an example is the case of the negotiation on the biodiversity convention beyond national jurisdiction, right? But here we have a precedent where they have an agreed text that includes specific principles that we can mirror some of those principles for the Plastics Treaty, because the negotiation already took place in other fora, but some of those principles still applying for the Plastics Treaty, right? And the same will be with definitions. The same will be with who will be the next chair, because we're going to change the chairperson this time from Gustavo Mesa Cuadra to what was agreed at INC1, kind of agreed or decided that will be Luis Valles from Ecuador that will start being the chair. So there are different procedural issues that are apart from the rules of procedure where we see potential derailment from what we call spoilers countries.
Okay, thank you, Andres. We have two questions in the chat. One is from Electa, and I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name properly, saying, will the negotiation process take into consideration the peculiarity of certain regions, for example, Africa? Electa, I am not sure if I understood properly your question, so maybe you could speak up and explain to us what would you like to know? If you are in a position to, I don't know, Andres, if you understood.
Yeah.
Well?
So
okay.
So I think that this is beyond only procedural matters, but is more a general question on peculiarity of certain regions like Africa. For instance, the question for me is, it depends for what, for means of implementation that need to be discussed, and there is some countries calling for having some, like countries calling for having one principle that is the common but differentiated responsibilities in being cross-cutting principle of the plastic treaty negotiation that have specific implications on schedules of obligations and also on means of implementation. That is where we see some countries coming with that with valid arguments to have the common but differentiated responsibilities as a principle, right? The other question is, Africa has been very strong on plastic laws in general and advanced even before Europe and other regions. And the peculiarity is, yes, there will be, even if we talk about the substance, are we having specific schedules for obligations or not, right? Or are we having the same? And this is up to discussion. Right now, there is some intention for some countries to have that, but it's ongoing. So that is just an example of peculiarity of certain regions, right? And for rules of procedure, I think that I don't see that the question apply for that part.
Thank you, Andres. And then there is another question from Douglas, and that's going to be our last question to answer because we're already 2 minutes over time. You mentioned that at INC3, there will be adoption of rules of procedure. Does this mean there will be no further opening up a discussion on these rules, or I missed something?
No, what I mentioned and I highlight is what is in the actual agenda that was proposed by the chair and the UNEP secretariat. But that doesn't mean that is what will happen, because many countries will, and we had countries like India that mentioned during the INC2 that we can't continue if we don't adopt rules of procedure, right? But at the international level, we have precedents to, for instance, the rules of procedure of the Security Council apply in a provisional basis since almost the creation of the Security Council. So there is precedent that on international law on that. The question whether is more existential of we want to keep that as a living topic or not. And this is a decision that need to come also from the strategy from the chair and the bureau itself. So I guess countries will keep trying to open the discussion again, right?
Thank you, Andres, and thank you for the very informative session. Thank you, our amazing interpreters as well, for the translation to French, and thank you to everyone that was on the background making everything work, the note takers and everything. I would ask Karine if you can stop sharing the screen And if you could take another picture, just because you took a picture in the beginning, but many people entered after that. So if you could just take a quick picture, if people can put their cameras on. So you can see your beautiful smiles. Always happy to see your faces. Okay, so here we go. Smile. 1, 2, 3. One more. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate it. I think this discussion will keep going for a long time. So thank you and have a good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anna. Thank you so much, Andres. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. Unfortunately, I couldn't activate my video option.
No problem. Thank you.